Okay. My name is Robert Franklin. I'm conducting an oral history interview with George and Marjorie Kraemer on December 9th, 2016. The interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. I will be talking with George and Marjorie about their experiences working at the Hanford site. And for the record, can you state and spell your full names for us, starting with George?
George R. Kraemer, and Kraemer's K-R-A-E-M-E-R.
Okay.
Marjorie Kraemer, K-R-A-E-M-E-R.
Okay. And George is G-O-R-G-E.
Yes.
And Marjorie?
M-A-R-J-O-R-I-E.
Great, thank you. So tell me how and why did you both come to the Hanford site together?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell me how and why you both came to the Hanford site.
I was at the University of Wisconsin
Okay.
in 1955, and I had a friend that was out here, and he told me about all of the deer hunting and the fishing and all the good things, and he enticed me to come out.
There wasn't much of that in Wisconsin?
Oh, yeah, but going out west,
Oh, right. Okay.
that was new. And so I drove out in April of 1955, and I already had a job out here.
Okay.
And I stayed at the dorms, M5,
M5.
as I remember.
And what was your job?
I was the lab assistant first,
Okay.
from April of 55 to May of 56, and then I transferred to drafting department.
Okay.
This was a General Electric.
Okay.
And I was in there for, from 56 to December of 65.
Okay.
And then I was asked to take another position it was actually with Isochem. And it was engineering analyst, a shop engineer. I went through all of those, where I worked in a shop where they built pressure vessels for the Hanford, for Pyrex, for Radox, B plant, T plant. Must be one more in there. And I did inspection of them.
Okay.
Fantastic job. Did that for, quite a few years. Then in April of 75, for another 2 years, I was a shop planner. I planned the activities of this shop, fabrication shop. And then in July of 1977, I was asked to be manager of this facility, of the shops. They had 6 separate shops, like machine, tool and die, a boilermaker, sheet metal, rotating equipment, welding lab, and all that.
Okay.
A fun job, too.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. That was down my alley. That, in April of 81, I was asked to manage the activities of the design drafting group in 200 areas. And I had supervising the unit managers, engineering designers, drafters, and engineers. Then in April of 84, I was manager of a specialty fabrication design and fabrication engineering support group. Again, this had drafting, designers, checkers, a few engineers. And then Westinghouse came. And I was asked to be the manager of design services, which had all the drafting for Westinghouse.
Okay.
Did that for a number of years. And then my manager was a director, and I told him one day, "You need an assistant." I said, I'm going to retire in due time. And I said, you need a assistant. And he looked at me kind of odd. But anyway, 6 months later, he called me up and he says, would you be my assistant? Had a good job, nobody reporting to me. I did engineering quality council, the price program, and great ideas, employee concerns, Native American outreach, the signature awards for Westinghouse. I wrote a few speeches, some for the president of Westinghouse.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of a good job. Then I wrote a little note here, and I retired after 36 years in July 31st, 1991. 36 years, 3 months, and 19 days, or nearly 9,500 work days, over 106,000 hours at 8 hours a day, and over 6 million minutes at Hanford.
Wow, they really brought that down to the very last thing.
But what I'm most proud about, except for that first transfer, all of my jobs I was asked to take.
Okay.
I thought that was said something for me anyway.
And Marjorie, how did you come to Hanford?
Well, he came out, so
So
we were engaged, and I came out in May, and we got married out here.
May of
1955.
55. Okay.
Right.
You guys were married here in Richland, or
Yes.
yeah.
Oh,
And
Coeur d'Alene.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Oh, Coeur d'Alene. Beautiful up there.
And,
Yes.
I didn't work that first summer. I came in May, and then I got a job at General Electric in September in the finance department.
Okay.
And I worked in the 700 area downtown. And then they reorganized, or disorganized, I used to call it, and split up. And then I had to go out to the 200 areas for a few years. And then I quit at the end of 1958 and had our children.
Okay.
And after our son was in kindergarten, I went to work for a doctor in town, a pathologist, for 10 years. And then I went to work for Exxon Nuclear, Advanced Nuclear Fuels, which was eventually bought out by Siemens, whom I retired with in 1991 also.
Oh, wow. And when did you start with Exxon Nuclear?
1975.
Oh, okay. So you spent a significant amount
Yeah,
of time.
right,
And
yeah.
did you also do finance?
Yes.
And accounting
yes,
there,
yes,
too.
in the accounting department, yeah.
Great. And so how did you face any particular issues as being a woman in the workplace from the 50s?
Well, let's see.
Especially in that early era, where
Right.
women were first
You couldn't work overtime.
I remember when I worked out in the areas, in the 200 areas, women couldn't work overtime for some reason. I don't know if it was a union thing or a company policy or...
Or you couldn't
The
work
federal
alone
gov-
anyway.
Right, you couldn't work overtime. They didn't want you to work out there then.
And you couldn't work alone either?
Well, in overtime, I remember when I was manager, if some of the ladies had to work, we had to have somebody around.
Like a male supervisor or just
Yeah,
a
somebody.
supervisor?
Another worker
Somebody.
even.
Okay. Interesting.
And it was different living in Richland because, it was a government town. And
Right.
you've probably interviewed people where you get on a housing list to get a house and your name comes up. You go down and look in this little glass deal where they had the lists.
They posted of the
You
new.
posted them.
Oh,
and
really?
when
I
you-
haven't heard that. Could you describe that in more
Yeah.
detail?
Yeah, we put in for housing as soon as we got here. That was in May, and they had a posted board. Every week they'd put a posting out there on a board and say who was eligible for a house. Finally, being the lowest peons out there, we were eligible for a 2-bedroom prefab.
Oh, okay. I live in one of those now.
So we got to look at 2 or 3 of them.
Okay.
Had to
then
do
you-
it real promptly,
Right.
and we choose one on 706 Abbott
Husband of 6 Abbott. Okay.
in Richland there.
Town, yeah. It was different because, well, the house came with appliances, like a refrigerator, stove, and
What
You
was it,
didn't-
$26
$27
a
a
month or something for
something.
rent?
And how was that comparative to, like, is that a pretty average rent, or was that pretty
Well,
good deal?
it was cheaper because
It was
the
cheap.
government. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, I didn't make too much money back then either.
And of course, if something went wrong, you just called up housing and they came and fixed it.
Were
Or
they-
they gave you a new one, a new stove or whatever.
Were they pretty prompt? Like, was
Yes.
the service?
Yeah,
Yes.
they
was
were.
pretty
Yes,
good?
They were.
they had a special group. That's all they did was maintain the homes.
Okay. And describe that atmosphere of living in a company town where everyone worked at the same place and was landlords of the government. I wonder if you could kind of talk about that, just the atmosphere.
Well, every Friday afternoon, the GE News would come out. You've probably heard of the GE News.
Yeah, we have copies of.
Yeah.
It was
GE News
the
in our
local
collection.
one, and that was reading, and they had the want ads in there, which you always went because people were buying and selling a lot of things in that era. Like she said, I remember the water. The water we had both irrigation water and house water, two separate spigots there, and that was kind of interesting. That all come with our $26 or $27.
Wow.
After about I don't know how many years it was, we got we bought that house. That's right. Excuse me.
In '58 when they.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
58
bought
when
that
they sold
house.
it.
I think we paid $2,200 for it, as I remember.
Wow.
They were appraised, maybe $3,000, and then they give you a discount.
Wow.
And not too long after that, we moved into a three-bedroom
Three-bedroom.
pre-cut
Okay.
that we bought on our own through the realtor.
Was that one of the newer constructions?
Well, it was
Or-
better
It was better.
construction.
It was better construction.
The prefabs are made out of 2x2s instead of 2x4s, for structure.
Okay.
And plywood on a quarter-inch plywood on inside and outside, and some insulation wasn't too good in it, but it had a little bit.
Yeah, the insulation leaves a little bit.
It's some sort of paper
Sorry.
product, 2 inches thick.
Right. Well, because those were made originally for the Tennessee
Right.
Valley Authority, and
And they were supposed
A
to
short-term,
not last very long.
short-term thing,
yeah, and they're still
and they're still in use.
around. Yeah,
Still
yeah.
in use.
Mine
Yes.
has been pretty extensively remodeled, but
Yeah.
it's still standing.
I do remember when we first came here that Richland had the highest
Yes.
birth rate and the lowest death rate of
Right.
anyone in the nation. It was
We were part of
always,
that.
yeah, right.
And that was likely due to the medical care, right?
The medical
good
care,
Well,
a lot
and-
of young
care.
people
And
coming
everybody
into
worked
work.
at Hanford, and so they were younger. There wasn't any grandma and grandpas around.
Right. Other people I've interviewed have mentioned that when
That
they,
there
especially-
wasn't older people you didn't see in Richland.
Right, there was no one who was retired or
You're right.
grandparents.
No, right,
Right.
right
So it was
on.
mostly probably people your age and then children
Yes.
of varying ages.
Yes.
But, yeah.
You talk about the other things went on. We had limited places where we could go out and eat.
Okay.
Like we had the Mart building. That was a popular place.
Well, they
The
had
kind
a
of a
grease-
drugstore,
A little diner, in
little
it or
dining
whatever,
area and
or-
things like
Greasy
that.
spoon
Yeah,
type of thing.
Yeah.
And where was that?
Well, it was on the corner of where the post office used to be, on that corner there across the street. And of course, it was kind of like a Quonset hut.
Yeah, it was like a big Quonset.
And
yeah.
of course, it's been torn down, but
Sure. Yeah.
Remodeled anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Quonset huts haven't lasted somehow.
When I lived in the dorms, M5, for a month, 2 months before we got married, and I was out here with the friends. She wasn't out here yet, and then trying to get our food every night. We had to go eat in restaurants every night, and it's kind of interesting. Very limited.
Yeah.
Compared to what you have nowadays.
Right. Or even perhaps where you come from, and was that at University of Wisconsin? Is that Madison?
Yes.
Okay. So imagine a college town would have probably had a little bit more.
Oh yes.
Yes. For and so what about the nightlife? Did you ever partake in nightlife in Richland, or was there much of nightlife?
No. We played cards and things.
Yeah, a
with
lot of
friends.
cards. I had a couple friends out here already, and then we made new friends pretty rapidly. And
Right.
I said we had a lot of cards.
Played cards.
Camping. Did a lot of
Camping.
camping. I had a '49 Ford
Okay.
at that time frame, and the first summer we were here, we were about camping every weekend.
And where would you go often?
Oh, the Blue Mountains, north above Spokane,
Mount Rainier.
Mount Rainier a lot. That's
Oh, wow.
one of my favorite places.
White Pass.
Yeah, that's really pretty up there.
So that took a lot of our time in the summer.
I bet.
Winter times were, well, we didn't go camping, but again, that's mostly we had a lot of cards and games and that we played with our young friends.
And you hunted a lot. So.
Yeah, I did a lot of deer hunting and a lot of fishing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you said that's what brought you out here.
Yes.
I'm wondering if each of you, starting with Marjorie first this time, could describe a typical workday when you worked out on site.
Oh. Well, let's see. When I worked out in the area, it was a little different than in town because I had to ride the bus.
Right.
And of course, I think I got up about 6, and of course it was dark, and walked a couple blocks to the bus, and you paid a nickel for each way to go out to the area, which was about 27 miles. And when you got there in the wintertime, it was dark, and you went in, and I worked in the B plant and it was all cement, no windows. So you went in and it was dark. When you came out to go home, it was dark. And so you never saw the sunshine until the weekend.
Wow.
And in the summer, it was awful because not all the buses were air conditioned.
None of them were.
And, well, we had a few, I think, that were.
Not them.
Yeah, gosh. And you were just soaked, because it was so hot. 100 degrees and
Yeah.
riding in this bus.
And they allowed smoking on the buses.
Oh.
And that was not good for us that didn't smoke.
Oh, you guys didn't. You guys, both of you didn't.
No.
Seems to have probably in the 50s been kind of more of a rarity than or at least it seems like a lot more
True.
people smoked then. Especially, I could imagine in the winter time with closed windows, that would be pretty impressive. So, George, what about you in the describe a
Well, I
typical-
worked out in 2 East for that first 9 months or so, and that was like our 222S lab, and no windows in there. Get up early, ride the bus, go to the where Stores is now. That's a big bus lot there. So all of the buses would go into there, and you would get off your bus and take the appropriate 200 area bus or whatever, 100 area bus. And likewise, when you came home, you'd come back to that bus lot, get off the buses, and get to your route.
Was that time on the bus included in your work day?
That was my
or-
time.
It was included in your time.
Yes.
Was not included in your time?
No, it was
Was
not
it? Was
included
not?
in.
Oh, it was not included.
No.
So that was just
No.
considered.
Yeah.
Sort of. Was that a pretty fast transition though, from catching the bus by your home to go to the lot to then get on the other
This was
bus?
fast.
It was pretty efficient.
It was, and the buses were pretty much on time.
Okay.
For some
get-
reason, I mostly had express buses where we didn't stop at the bus lot.
Well, later on, yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so then you said you'd get on the appropriate bus to the area, and then take me forward from there.
Okay, we get on the bus there, and I went into the lab, and that was an all enclosed building again, no windows. And I did nuclear, or not nuclear, but radioactive waste disposal and things like that. We get a bus from 300 area about once a week or twice a week, and they would, not a bus, a tanker truck. Sorry about that. A tanker truck come in, and I unloaded that into some of our special waste tanks out there.
Are these the tanks in the tank farms, or are these
No,
different
that
tanks?
wasn't a tank farm. That
Okay.
was a special area just for the 300 area waste.
Okay. And what would you do with the waste?
Well, the tanker truck would back up into a big nozzle, and I'd hook up the nozzles
Okay.
and drain the tanks and let it drain for an hour or whatever it was, and then go back out and unhook the thing and wave the driver on.
Okay. And what would be done with the waste at that facility?
It was just stored.
Just stored. Okay.
Yes. I don't think we outside of maybe doing some sampling, which I didn't do. That was it.
Would that eventually go into the ground then?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yeah.
And that's when it would eventually go into the single shelled or double shelled tank.
Sooner or later.
Sooner or later, find its way there. Okay.
Yeah. And then I transferred into drafting, and that was downtown in the 760 building.
Okay.
And of course, that way I could ride to work or walk to work.
And that's like pencil and or pen and table drafting, right? Like on a drafting board.
Drafting board, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that was kind of nice because I could ride bicycle, walk, or take the car, whatever. And I'd get home at least when it was daylight.
That seems like kind of an interesting job shift from like handling waste to then a more like technical thing like drafting.
What started that, my boss wanted some sketches of flow diagrams and stuff like that. I said, I can do them. I did them, and he was impressed with them, and he says, you ought to be in drafting. And he led the way for me.
Okay, interesting. What did you go to school for?
Engineering.
Oh, okay. Just engineering in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then Marjorie, did you attend college?
No.
Oh,
no.
okay. How did you gain the training for accounting and bookkeeping? Was it just all on the job?
Yeah, on-the-job training, and you could advance back then. Nowadays, if you didn't have a college degree, well, I don't think you would go as far.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Another thing, I also took a lot of classes. The GE at this time, they had engineering folks which would give us classes in various subjects. And
Was that over here in the East Building?
I can't
at a
remember
different-
exactly where it was. Sometimes it was, I think it was the Federal Building, I think it
okay.
was.
Okay.
Just various things that would help me in my work and help me in my promotions too.
Okay. No, interesting. That's kind of seems like so much was provided to workers in terms of training and housing, and
and
seems,
while
I think it seems foreign to a lot of workers today to think of, a company being that kind of paternal, caring and paternalistic almost is kind of the vibe I get off of that era of Hanford's history.
While I was downtown in drafting there, I was in the piping squad, and we worked on facilities in 100 areas, 200 areas, not 300 areas then. And so I got to know pretty much all the areas, and I went out to visit them, and lots of times where you have to go out and see what is really there. You go look at old drawings, and may not be the same.
Right, because you're not looking at the as-built,
Right.
You're looking at the older.
Right, and so consequently, we made a fair number of trips out to the various sites, regardless of where they were.
Okay, so you got then to see the whole site pretty well.
I think I did.
Get to
Yes.
know it. Okay. Marjorie, what was? Well, I'm gonna ask this question to both of you. We'll start with Marjorie. What was the most challenging or rewarding aspects, and or rewarding aspects of your work at Hanford?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. It was a good place to work, and it, paid well. And I guess that's, the main thing I wasn't wasn't out for some big career or anything like that,
Sure.
So
And George, what about you? What were some of the more challenging or rewarding aspects of?
We went through a lot of companies: GE, Westinghouse, Atlantic Richfield, Isochem, maybe another one in there. But the fact is, I never lost a day of work throughout 36, almost 37 years. I was never laid off. But I think most rewarding was being recognized for my work, being asked to take all these promotions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was rewarding to me. I must be doing something right.
Right. Yeah. Great. Did the nature of the work at Hanford ever unsettle either of you? The just the amount of the chemical and nuclear waste or possibility
radiation
of
and all
Soviet
that.
attack or anything like that. Did that ever?
Well, when we first moved here, the Army was still here at Camp Hanford.
Right.
And they had Nike missile sites up on, not Badger, but...
White Bluffs out that way, didn't they, across the river?
Yeah, White Bluffs and...
Rattlesnake?
Yeah, Rattlesnake.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you wonder about that. Planes would fly over every now and then. But other than that, as far as being attacked, no. And radiation-wise, I've learned to respect it.
Sure.
I never got involved in any serious things, even though I went into some bad places probably, but I never had in the various canyons and stuff of the buildings, but never had any problems.
Okay. And same for you, Marjorie?
Yeah, and of course I wasn't out there all that long.
Right.
But I remember when we travel quite a bit, and when we would travel and people, well, where do you work? And I would never say Exxon Nuclear. I would say Exxon, because they thought we'd glow in the dark, probably.
Right.
That was very common, regardless of where you went. Like, say, we travel a lot, and then you stand up and introduce yourself, and you didn't want to say a great deal because they figured you didn't want to be around you.
Some people were.
Why do you think that endures? Because even today, that's
ignorance.
I think it's still true of
Ignorance of radiation, like in the paper here now. They said we are the Chernobyl. No, there's not that possibility.
Right. I mean, because our problem is mostly chemical.
Yes.
It's not so much nuclear. I mean, there's radioactivity.
Oh, there's a lot
there,
of radioactivity. There's no question. But it's
a-
not going to explode. It's not that type.
Right. We won't have a meltdown.
Right.
At least. We can say that much. What are some of your memories of any major events in Tri-Cities history? Thinking of like plants shutting down or starting up.
President Kennedy
Yeah.
came out here. I can't remember the year now.
Right.
September 14th, 1963.
Anyway,
Yeah,
I was there.
17.
We all bust out to, was that?
He
100
was
N?
out in the 100 N,
100 N,
wasn't
maybe,
it?
or
'Wasn't it?
100 N, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, you
Yeah, I
came
think
to
so.
dedicate part of the steam generating.
Incidentally, I did the first working drawings, the scope drawings of the piping of the major process piping of 100 N.
Oh, okay.
that was a fantastic job. I know one time I did my drawings, got them, and they decided, hey, that's classified after the fact. I had to go through, collect all of my drawings and everything, and then I had to secure my drafting boards and stuff like that. But we did it.
I can remember in the 703 building when I worked downtown in I think it was 55 or 56, Ronald Reagan came because he had the General Electric
That's right.
Theater.
Right.
And he came through our building and was talking to everybody.
Did you get to meet? Did you get
Yes,
to meet him?
uh-huh, yeah.
Oh, okay. And did you also?
I don't.
I think you were out in the area.
I was out in the area, and I don't think I knew he was here. Obviously, he was on. He toured some buildings, but I didn't get to see him.
That's interesting. I've heard he come, but I hadn't met anybody who actually really.
Yeah, he came through our 703 building.
Oh, okay. So imagine that was
finance was, you know.
Quite an interesting thing to have a Hollywood celebrity coming to Hanford. So did you both go to see President Kennedy when he came to dedicate the?
I didn't get to. Did
you were not working at Hanford then, I don't think. But anyway, the whole company, all the people were there that could be excused. They just bust everybody out there.
Right. And were you one of those people?
Yes, I was one of them people.
Can you kind of describe that that scene?
Well, he was on the podium, which was quite a ways away from me there, and he gave quite a talk, you know. And of course, the excitement of hearing your president or seeing your president was kind of interesting. And I really don't know what he said anymore. But I thought that was a major highlight. Another one probably is when General Electric decided they were going to leave.
Right. And that was in mid-60s, right?
65 probably.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds
66 somewhere.
I think so.
So describe that. How was that mood around Hanford and around Richland? Because General Electric had been so prominent, you know, in everyone's
Well, it affected
lives.
George quite a bit.
Yeah, it affected my pension quite a bit. You know, I worked for over 36 years, and for those 10 years that I work under GE, that's not included in my final pension.
Interesting.
So I get, I don't know, very little a month for those 10 years. It's in a separate pension fund.
Why is that? That seems a little.
Because you were
The government works in strange and mysterious ways, and there were lawsuits and stuff like that trying to get them to include our years in the master plan.
It was because one of the main reasons was you weren't 35 yet.
That's another thing. I was 10 years. Yeah, I wasn't 35 yet. That was a condition to get vested.
Cutoff to get that
Right.
included in your
Just so you could start to
seniority.
Right.
Right. Vested. Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Wow.
And of course, then when the big things, when Westinghouse come over to retake all of the together, GE split up, and then we had various split up companies, and then all of a sudden we're back together again.
Yeah, it seems like one other person I interviewed a little bit ago remarked at how the contracting agency of the government doesn't always seem to know. Like, it tries one big contractor, and then it tries to split it up a bunch, and then they go back to one big contractor, and then they want to split it up a bunch. And so I'm wondering if either you or both of you can talk about that shifting of contractors and how that impacted your work and your life.
Well, in my case, same job, same boss, same everything. There wasn't much new. We different name on the paycheck, obviously.
But your units stayed pretty intact
Yes,
throughout the change.
there were no major reorganizations at first because of the takeovers of the different companies.
Okay. And Marjorie, what about you? So you worked initially those first few years, and then later on you worked for Exxon Nuclear, which Was Exxon Nuclear, were they a contractor or a subcontractor, or were they just
They-
aligned with
They were a private company.
private company?
Yeah, they just
Okay.
made nuclear.
So they were like a
pellets
kind of
for
like a
nuclear
service
fuels.
company for Hanford.
No,
No.
no, they
okay.
made nuclear fuels for reactors all over the world.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Okay. So they weren't a Hanford. They were
No,
just in
they
the
were a
same
private-
industry, but
Yes.
yeah, and it was Exxon.
right.
It was called Jersey Nuclear when it first started out,
Okay.
and then it was Exxon, and then they changed to Advanced Nuclear Fuels under Exxon,
Okay.
and then Siemens bought them in 1989, I believe.
Okay.
And I worked for them for a couple of years. Nothing really changed, and then I retired with Siemens
Okay.
Corporation,
Interesting.
which was a really pretty good deal because they have really good benefits. German companies do.
They are very well known for that. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a pretty decent deal.
I think they worked half time because when we wanted to call them up, in Germany and talk to them about something, it seems like they were on vacation or they had a holiday. They were never there.
Any memories of the like social scene or local politics or just any like either before the great selling, the privatization or afterwards, Tri-Cities. What are actually, let me be more specific. I'm wondering if either of you can tell me about some of the protest activity that took place, or if you remember that in the beginning in the late 60s and into the 70s. Both the kind of the protests that were pro-Hanford and anti-Hanford.
No, we never did get involved in
I
any of them.
I didn't
but-
either. There were no major protests that I really remember. I know one time there's a few of them along the road when we went out
Okay.
around before you get to 300 area. They couldn't get out very far then.
Right.
But I didn't really take too much interest in them. I figured they weren't hurting anything.
So the Tri-Cities up until the late 60s was pretty segregated in terms of where African Americans could live. Even though they could work at Hanford, they couldn't always live in Richland for a while. And I'm wondering if you guys could, you observed that kind of
Yes.
that civil rights action and kind of some of that segregation before the civil rights.
Well, I remember that there were a few black, I don't know blacks going to the
Yeah,
high
black.
school and stuff when my daughter was going. Well, the Mitchells were here,
Right,
Yeah.
C.J. Mitchell,
And
yeah.
Cameron Mitchell was
Daughter
in my
went to school with
daughter's,
him.
and she was good friends with him, you know.
Yeah, he was one of the first
Yeah,
people
right.
to,
And they
to get someone to
lived-
sell him a house in Richland.
Right.
He had a lot of struggle getting that.
And I don't know what they did with the housing, government housing, if they gave it to. I guess
think
they
they
maybe
had
didn't give
no
it to black
choice then.
people.
I believe they had to live in East Pasco. for-
Yes, because I
for
don't
the
think they
60s.
could live in Kennewick either.
No,
And Kennewick was very bad.
Yeah,
in
they
that
had the
respect.
sundown
Yes,
laws.
right.
Yes. When we first moved here, I become good friends with a African, and we used to play cards with him and go places with him. And I thought we were well accepted.
Mm-hmm.
But he lived in Pasco, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
He did not live in Richland,
All right.
but I said it was very plain to us that Kennewick was very bad, and they didn't even want to go to Kennewick, the colored folks.
Right.
And they were supposed to get out of town before, like you say, sundown,
Yeah.
Yes.
which is not very nice.
But it's not nice to say, but they knew their place.
Right.
You know,
where they knew where they could go and couldn't,
Yes.
where they were welcome and where they were not. Yeah. No, that squares pretty well with the historical record. Of that. Thank you for that.
When our daughter, after she graduated from high school, she went to WSU. And then she graduated from there. She got a nursing degree, and she went to Seattle and worked. And one of her comments once when she called me up, and she says, "Mom, we really led a sheltered life in Richland, you know, 'cause
What do you? That's interesting. I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit more. What would have been so sheltered about Richland for her?
Well, I think, you know, she went to Seattle and got a job, and her first job was in the King County Jail. She was a nurse in the clinic, and she saw all these prisoners and
Not the best clientele.
right. And that was one of her comments after she called me up and said, you know, we really should live a sheltered life after seeing all these homeless people and Skid Row, and you know, it's just different.
Right, because I imagine Richland would have been a pretty solid, you know, middle class, mostly white.
Right.
Still is majority, you know,
Right.
mostly white, middle class. You know, pretty safe. I mean, if you didn't work at Hanford, you didn't live in Richland until
Right.
1958,
Right.
and I imagine after that it was pretty slow to change.
Then
Most people who lived here worked at Hanford for.
I think the police had made their presence known in a good way.
Sure.
And I think that was different between Seattle
Right.
living in the outskirts of Seattle or wherever she lived.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine it would be in general an easier community to police where you knew everyone worked in the same
Right,
place.
right.
And everyone knew. A lot of people knew everyone else, and you know it was.
But crime was very low.
Sure.
Right.
First of all, you know, the folks have clearances, things like that. That's going to get a better grade of people because they went through all the rigmarole you have to go through.
I saved one of those questionnaires, those Q clearance deals, you know, I still have it.
Oh yeah.
And I left, when I filled mine out, I left 2 weeks of my life off of this.
Oh no.
And of course, they came back and wanted to know where I was, you know. I was in transit out here or something. And so they wanted
Because
to know.
those forms went pretty. They went back what, like 10 years or something like that, or they would.
Oh, it was well,
Renewed or unless there's a need to upgrade.
when I first filled it out. Of course, I was only like 20 years old, and so I didn't have that much to have to put on it. But they went back and people told us. You know, we were from a small town, and of course they told us. You know, these people.
Right.
They were asking about, you know.
Right, calling around.
They
Right,
were wondering
going to
what's
your-
going on.
Right. Yeah, I
going
know
to
that's.
where you went to school and where you worked back there.
Because I first got an L clearance when I came here.
And is that a lower or
That's a
higher?
lower grade.
Okay.
And then as soon as I transferred into drafting, I had to get a new clearance, a Q clearance again, which I had the rest of my time here.
Okay. Interesting. Were there still any? I'm always a little fuzzy on my dates on this. Were there any of the Atomic Frontier Days parades when you guys were here, or were those over by the time? That...
No, they were here, and in fact, Sharon Tate.
Yeah, Sharon Tate was
I
in
think
that.
one of the first few years we were here, she was the Miss Tri-Cities.
Oh, really?
The one,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Her dad was at Hanford, you know, Camp Hanford. He was an Army.
That's right, because I've always
Yeah.
heard she was an Army, or kind of an Army
Right.
brat.
Right.
And that's really interesting. I oftentimes I used to ask people about that question, and it would miss a lot, so I kind of stopped asking about Sharon Tate. But that's interesting that you remember. Do you remember seeing her? In, like,
Oh,
the,
sure.
Yeah,
she-
I remember they had
Well,
parades down
Yeah.
main one of the streets. I don't remember which ones now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And you guys went to the Atomic Frontier Days.
Oh, I certainly.
and all of that. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, those are very colorful and kind of interesting events.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of wish I could have seen one of those in the flesh. Great. And so, gosh, you guys have already, we've already run down so many of my questions without even meaning to ask them. But I still have a couple. Could you describe the ways in which security and secrecy impacted your jobs? respectively? And I'll start with Marjorie.
Well, you just knew that you weren't supposed to, I was in finance, and so I saw all these numbers and all this stuff, and you just knew you weren't supposed to talk about things like that. But other than that, I don't, it didn't really affect me all that much. But
Well, I know when we go on vacation or something, I go back to Wisconsin. We did quite a bit. And what do you do out there?
oh, yeah,
In general terms, you tell them.
Yeah.
But I was trying to remember some specifics. I'm sure there were some due with security.
It must have been very hard to work here in the 40s when you didn't know what you were doing. You were building all
we
this
knew
stuff.
what we were doing. What
And
we were
you-
making and all this thing. And back
And you could talk about it to your coworker,
Right.
and not be afraid of being evicted from your home and losing your job.
I remember looking at an old paper. It said big headlines, "It's bombs."
Yes, that's the Richland Villager from
Yeah.
right after the Nagasaki bombing. Yeah. Interesting. Do you remember, were there like searches or did they search people on the buses?
Yes.
Or okay.
Well,
Going home. It's a lot of times they just had to open your lunch pail up to make sure there was nothing in it.
You didn't have any atoms in your pocket or anything?
Yeah.
they didn't always look, but
They didn't always look, but every now and then they'd have a search day.
Okay. Kind of
And
keep you on your toes.
and of course all of the cars going to at 300 area where the major barricade was. You had to stop, open your trunks if you drove a car.
Right.
And then if you went into the various 200 areas, 100 areas, you had to stop again. Or you parked your car in the parking lot outside and walked in. And if you went into the various buildings, like Pyrex or like in the lab where I was there, you had a number and a radiation badge and your name and a number you were assigned. When I went to 222S, it was number 10. I must have got some big wheels number or something like that. But US 10, they would look you up to make sure in their file they'd make sure the picture matched you.
Wow. And that would be every time you
Every
come in?
time you went in the building there.
Wow. That's very tight security.
Yes.
When you said you had to go around the site a lot, how would you get around once you you took the bus in, but how would you get from one area to the other?
Our engineering department had cars, government cars.
Okay. And so then you just could only travel in...
And we just traveled in government cars out to the various facilities.
Okay. When did the bus service stop?
Good question. Let's see.
late 60s.
Probably in that era.
Because when we built a new house, and it was in 1966, and you still rode the bus then.
That's right.
So I think it was in the late 60s.
I would say
or
late 60s it
early
was.
70s.
And so then...
And there was much frustration
Too much frustration?
on a lot of people's part, including mine.
Really?
know,
Why was that?
I loved that bus ride. I mean, I loved going out there it was changed to, I don't know, 50 cents or something. It was higher price anyway. The nickel was just to pay insurance and liabilities. But so I had to drive my car out or get into a carpool or whatever.
But then for a while, they stopped the service in town, picking everybody up, and then you could go to the bus lot and catch a bus.
They
For a while,
stopped
for a few
the rounds through town.
Okay. That's such an interesting structure of life, of everybody in one town that all catches the bus, and
They all work
and
the
then you know when the buses are coming, and everyone kind of depends on it.
Yes.
And that's just such an interesting. Seems so kind of almost foreign to to I think a lot of people today. And so you said that was kind of a chagrin that the bus, is that because you like just not having to drive, or not?
I like not having to drive. I knew that I had to be outside there at 6 o'clock or whatever it was every morning, and it was there. It was.
You could read. You could do work. You know,
Yeah,
you could do all sorts of things.
When I was manager out there for a while, I could do a lot of work on the bus.
Right.
I had my own philosophy. I did not like to take any work home. I had my briefcase, and I would do a lot of stuff on the bus. That was, 45 minutes of uninterrupted time, and I could get a lot of my work done.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Interesting. What would either, both of you, sorry, what would you like future generations to know about working at Hanford and living in Richland during the Cold War? We'll start with you, George.
Well, I think you're doing part of it. Let them know what's going on. And, the kids never really knew what we were doing, I don't think, in detail.
Right.
Yeah, they knew in general. As I look back at the government, not too impressed.
Really? Why is that?
The stuff that goes on out there now. When I was working, I felt I was doing a job. Things were going out in the shops. Things were going out the door. We were making things. Things were happening. I was proud of our work. Now I begin to wonder how long, the tank farms have been undergoing their thing for years, and it's going to be another amount of years before they do anything. It's not enough things are happening.
Okay. Interesting. Marjorie, what about you? What would you like future generations to know about working at Hanford and living in Richland during the Cold War?
Well, it was just a different sort of life. You were kind of protected, I guess. You don't want to say, everybody knew everybody, and you all worked at the same place, and your kids went to the schools in town. You went to the doctors that are in town, and it was just a different sort of a.
Right, like your daughter had said, maybe a little protected, sheltered
life. Yeah.
It's so interesting to me because George, the thing that you said about feeling like you'd done something, I've heard that from other interviewees who had worked in that transition period, who had worked when Hanford was producing and felt real sense of accomplishment, and then kind of felt like it was mired down during cleanup, and that the mission's unclear, or the work doesn't progress, and Marjorie, it's always been amazing to me to hear that it does seem like a really safe and peaceful place, but when you look at it kind of on there's a flip side to that, though. It's amazing that there's this safe, peaceful place next to 9 nuclear reactors and like a major target in the Cold War, and it's
I guess that's true. I don't know. You just.
But I mean, I think those two can exist side by side. That it could be, a place of production, but also of danger, and a place of safety, but also and of security. It's just that there's a lot of contradictions in Hanford that I think are really interesting that get brought out in these interviews. So thank you. Is there anything that I haven't asked either of you about that you would like to talk about?
No. I'm sure I'll think of someone when I get home.
Yeah.
That's very common. It happens all the time. I get emails a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So, I wish I had said this.
Oh, let's see. I think when I was a shop engineer out there in the shops, best years of my life out there. Again, I felt proud that we were doing something. Things are going out the door. I was responsible for a lot of critical measurements and things of the jumpers, the tanks, and everything that we did in the shop. And then troubleshooting. There were some failures out there, and I would go out and troubleshoot to see how we could fix things, contaminated vessels and things like that. But those were good years.
Right.
Best years I had out there. Yeah. Management was good, but a lot more responsibilities, but those worked out too.
Right. Great.
And I think the schools were, were good. And
right.
Gave our kids a good education and had good teachers. And
right. I've heard that a lot, that people, there were a lot of well-educated people that worked at Hanford and at first Battelle, Hanford Labs, and then Battelle and Pacific Northwest National Labs, and so that there was a high focus on education. And
another thing is probably more so than now, but the school sports didn't have too much else to do, so there was a lot of basketball games and football games and soccer games and all that sort of things that people went to, and they really supported the high school sports.
Okay. You think that's more then than now?
I think more then than now. There was less to do.
Right. It was a little more of an isolated community.
Right. And they were, of course, this year they went to the...
Well, this year different.
the tournaments. But when our daughter and son were in high school, they were always going to tournaments, and I always had to take kids and chaperone,
Oh, yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming.
It's our pleasure.
I see that you've brought some things. Would we be able to scan those and keep them with part of your interview?
You can have those. That's my work history.
Okay, great. We'll put this. We'll scan this and put this with your interview.
And she's got some pictures there.
Are these family pictures or?
No, these are pictures of out at Hanford. This is one when I worked in the area. There was 1 million man-hours without a accident,
Oh wow. Okay.
And they had a fashion show, and this is me right here in radiation outfit. That we modeled the.
Oh, there we go.
We modeled the outfits they wore in the contaminated labs.
Which one are you? Are you the one in the white cowl?
Yeah, and the one right with the.
Oh, okay.
All covered up, yeah.
Yeah, kind of a little hard to tell. Wow, that's great. That's a great picture. Oh yeah, General Electric Photo Division.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would we be able to scan these and
Sure.
put them with your interview? That would be wonderful. Okay, great. Well, thank you again. Thank you all so much. It's been a really excellent interview.
Thank you.
Did good.